Hello, everyone. My name's Sophia Hall, and I'm the moderator for today's Meet a Poet series. I'm a poet myself, hailing from Washington, D.C., where I served as the Youth Poet Laureate in 2023. I'm also a student at the University of Pennsylvania, where I study English and creative writing. I'm delighted to introduce today's Meet a Poet, Kailah Figueroa. Kailah is a rhetorical engineer, memory archivist, and part-time prose stylist. Her work has appeared in Black Warrior Review, Callaloo Journal, The Cincinnati Review, Plowshares, Poetry Northwest, and others. A Best New Poets and Pushcart Prize nominee, Figueroa has received support and fellowships from Breadloaf Writers Conference, Cave Canem Foundation, Fine Arts Work Center, US-UK Fulbright Commission, and Vermont Studio Center. Born in New York City and raised in Towson, Maryland, she earned an MFA in poetry from Rutgers University, Newark, where she taught creative writing to undergrad students. Her manuscript, Before the Bull Dreams Me, was selected as a finalist for the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics 2025 Book Prize. Her biggest dream is for her and her friends to all live on the same street. You can visit her on her website, KailahFigueroa.com. Thanks so much for joining us today, Kailah. I'm really excited to hear your poems read aloud and to have conversation afterward. If you have any questions for Kailah, please put them in the chat as I will do the Q&A session. So I'm going to turn it over to Kailah and her wonderful poetry.
Thank you, Sophia. I'm super excited to be here. I have a few poems for you guys. This first one is called Two Inlets in Winter. Some warmth is irrational, like 70 degrees in January, like open windows and rolled up wool sleeves, but not like the southern waters we peer into, but do not touch. At the end of the dock, memories leak from us. Salt waves sweeping the Shelton shores, the house with no photographs, our walk to the boathouse after your father got married. After the ceremony, you drove the drunk man home. I should have asked for more. I should have asked about the night, the music, the dancing, the texture of the current. Memory does not flinch at my interrogation. I can't go back. I leave it there alone. In Lusby, the cabin is warm, firewood is plenty, cardinals yawn, the well is frozen, and basil and tomatoes left on the cutting board. Long inlet mark the end of our always sun sea. As the sun melts into the wake, you want a dinner table like this one. I want flowers in every vase. In the morning, you are asleep. Ice rain soothes January's hunger for humidity. I wonder what would have happened if you woke before I did. I trace the curve of your head on the pillowcase with my eyes. I do not wake you. I watch the morning dew wrinkle on the sunlight above. I look out the window and watch the lake carry the rain. This next poem is kind of about realizing the end of a relationship before it's actually ended. And also thinking about, for me, I lived in Baltimore, which is about an hour from the capital in America. And I left where I lived for college, and I was so eager to leave where I was from and start something new. And then being in a relationship with someone who decided to move to the exact place that I was trying to get away from. So this poem's kind of about the idea of like making new memories over the old ones. And just that process, we're also realizing this kind of crumbling of what was happening. This is called Post Sentiment. In the apartment above a barren optometrist, we look out the kitchen window. Two cars collide, one cratered, the other's driver's side door clipped off. A crowd gathers to triage while cop cars turn boulevards into dead ends. He says, "It's always been like this," and I agree. He means the wreckage. I'm talking about our fragility. When I left the city 5 years ago, there was no vision of a return. I remember when I first told him about this coast, the cold seasons and cicadas. I was generous in the pitch, as was winter with all of it. Now I'm back here for him. The crestfallen skies and copper streetlights once marked my girlhood, now beg for enlistment and new memories, while they stain the streets with the same shadows. He loves the waterfront, the taverns, the stadium view from the bedroom window. I don't know how long we'd be in this city, in each other's lives, but when the time arrives, one of us will crater while the other will combust, and there will be no triage. Soon his memory will make an enemy out of me, and I'll hold no defense. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're on our way to the Keystone Corner for jazz and dry drinks. Through the rearview mirror, I see him. I see myself. I don't see us anymore. I know the years will unfold on different tables, and time will commence its multiplication trick. I've become indifferent to the patterns of loss, but I'll carry every crease and grieve this city again, this time for a different reason. This next piece, I was thinking of the myth of Narcissus, and this idea of being obsessed and so enveloped in the self, but also looking at it through perspective of savior complex, which is the title of the poem. This is kind of about being in a relationship with someone who thinks that they are there to save you, and also being in a relationship and kind of dealing with this idea of self-actualization. This is called Savior Complex. The year I turned into a carriage to be pushed around, I lasted 6 seasons between inlets and echoes before I drifted from his grasp. I was jealous of the wind, crystalline, twisting through white narcissus, never caught in their systems or cells. "You saved yourself," a friend wrote, wishing me a happy birthday. I didn't believe her. I reemerged, still alive, but I can't narrate the origin story. And how in my falling, I reached for the first set of hands and did not let go. Love was there, but it doesn't change anything. Every version of this myth ends with us face to face. In the hotel room, I unhooked our hands, gave him the last of me, then wrapped myself in bed sheets like gauze. Before the double-barreled epiphany, under his gaze I was perfect, until I got better. He called himself another casualty of mine, said all my luck was sourced from my face. The tragedy is months before he told me, "You have everything I want." And I thought this is what it meant to be saved. This next piece is from my current manuscript. You will hear in these next two poems this figure of the bull. And the bull is a kind of totemic figure that represents a person, a feeling, a conversation that I had during a very dark period of my life. Just a trigger warning, like I was dealing with suicidal ideation and just trying to find reasons to stay here on this earth. And in my manuscript, the bull kind of shapeshifts throughout the poems, throughout the narrative. So this next piece is written after a portrait, a figure drawing by Daniel McKinney called After Haste. And I don't have the paintings to show you guys, but it's in Fox's poem, which is just a poem that's written after a visual art piece. This is called The Gate. Totemic offense arrives without pretense or reason. In an oculate portrait I was bladed and worn and undreamt of on horseback. Before I met the bull, the hurt was circadian, my arteries were isolated. I can't disclose the full origin story. My battalion was left out of the frame. My anatomy was made public property. Still, I got up and rode on, naked, with my back to the world, out of the ivory, and into that vernal dream where there's no country, only bull territory. And like light refracted from an unknown source, I didn't know where I came or where I was going, but I knew I could not stay here. This next piece is called The Boulder, and it's thinking about the myth of Sisyphus and this idea of this internal kind of struggle to go upward, to heal, to alleviate, and being pushed right back down. I wasn't thinking so much about the literal myth, but more of just the action of the lifting and it coming back down. This is called The Boulder. Never mind the evolution. Our burdens at their core fall the same. I made a boulder out of my grief. She was so high above me, and when she fell, I was right there to push her back up the mountainside. There was no training. I was given an impossible task. Live in spite of it, or live despite it. A visual wasn't a part of the myth. There was no reason at the summit, though the gods offered the climb as an answer. Here, only the witness makes it out alive. At the center of my flesh, an unmastered light. I was willing and wild and black. I used to think this pain was precious and would anneal my wrongs. I won't talk about it anymore. There's nothing new to tell. If there are worse tragedies than this, then perhaps I was spared. There are no happy endings here, only time's reproduction. I let go and submit. But for a while, half of me was all of this. And this final poem was written after I was institutionalized. And I was in a hospital and probably for like a week, and I made friends with these guys, and we became very interested in a game called Rummy 500. It's a card game. And this is kind of just about my time in the hospital and this idea of recovery and trying to move forward in general towards life. This is called The Bull Teaches Me Dawn. There was no will, only footwork. In sunless hospital rooms, I played card games with men twice my age. Say it wasn't about falling, but the gated terrain's arrival after the jump. Then I landed not in heaven, but in Reading, where I traded my blue jeans and black boots for a dotted white gown. Here, the men and I push in tables together. pulling chairs to sit. Rummy, first to 500 wins. It took days to learn this. It took months to forfeit. I'm not the dealer, but I'm always ready for another round. The men say I need to perfect my poker face, but I have already. They can know my hand, not what my hands have done before now. The men say I'm getting better, playing the game inside the game. I've never been the winner, but every day I try. No one talks about what they did to get here, only whisper about what waits for them outside. I imagine myself as a husband to the women the men left behind, to flush and fold, to draw the shades, to feel like fresh laundry. I cannot be made new, but I can get clean. In Reading, I do not get to say goodbye to them. I put on my jeans and boots and wait for the truck to arrive. It won't take me home, but it'll take me away from this. Alone, against an unclenched technique, I lower my defense. There's a victory lap for the winners, and then there's mine. Tomorrow day will break again, and my dark will refract. But right now, look at me. Rising, rising, rising.
Thank you so much, Kailah, for your beautiful poetry and your beautiful reading. This poem that you just read, The Bull Teaches Me Dawn, was the first poem in the original packet, but I'm so glad that you concluded your reading with it. That image of rising with the sun and just overcoming is so beautiful. And I have a lot of questions, and I want to talk about this poem more. So I'm glad that that's kind of like the launching pad into our Q&A. And for anyone who is listening to the poetry reading and has questions for Kailah, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll try to incorporate it into the Q&A too. So in your poem, there's this one line where the speaker says, "They can know my hand, not what my hand has done before now," and mentioning that the men say I'm getting better playing the game inside the game. And I thought that this was really clever and poignant because in the poem itself, the speaker also never mentions the game or the rules of the game of Rummy 500. You don't even bring in like the typical stereotypes of a card game, like suits cards, like talking about spades or hearts, and yet the tension of the game still lingers throughout the poem. So how do you build up the premise of a poem based while still allowing room for ambiguity and absence, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I feel like, it's so funny. This was so long ago that if you told me let's play Rummy 500, I would not be able to give instructions. But for me, it was really about just the action, like the game kind of being this placeholder, or even just kind of feeling the space of being institutionalized and just how much like time moves when you're like in a hospital and there's bright lights all the time, um, and you're like kind of forced to wake up maybe when you don't want to. And the game, like, looking back, like it was just a game, like it was just something that we did um to make, sense of our time there. But it was really about the communal aspect of like, these guys were like, "Oh, let's play this game." And I'm like, "I don't even know what this is." And them taking the time and the intention of teaching me. And, the poem really is about just trying to like gather that whole period in very concise words because it was, a week of my life that I really wanted to write about, but I could never really find the words. And then I realized, like, when I think about that week of my life that I was writing about, it really was just about the game, and how it was a way to kind of be apart from myself and focus my attention on something else that wasn't, my own kind of mental landscape. Um, and in the poem, I was just really interested in um, not just focusing it on the game, but more just like the beginning, the middle, the after of the time there. And I don't know, I found that like when writing about this, I on like a kind of specific kind of like textual level, um, it wasn't really a way to inform, but more just kind of a representation of like that time. I don't know if that answers your question, right?
Yeah, it does. Like, the game becomes a stand-in for the emotional weight of the period, and it operates as a really cool metaphor, especially when it becomes when you use the language of the card game to
Mhm,
talk about the speaker's experience of meditating and wondering what it would be like to be the wives of these men, to flush and fold, and then there's the punning of the card game where you flush and fold, like in poker or other card games. But it's also domestic tasks. So I
mhm.
thought that was really cool. And there's this one really amazing instance of assonance in your poem when you say, "Then I landed not in heaven, but in Reading." And share so many of the same vowels, and it was really beautiful how it just kind of naturally flows into that. And I think sound is a really important part in your poetry. So, how conscious are you of sonic texture when you're writing?
Yeah, I'm always thinking about lyric and just kind of like the melody of a poem. I think in Tunelets in Winter, there's a line too that I felt like I kind of overdid it, like with, it was like salt waves sweeping the Shelton shores. Like I still read that and I'm like, okay, like that's a lot. That's a lot of S sounds right there. But I am trying to find a melody, but also kind of being short and concise in it, and hoping that it doesn't kind of overpower the poem. So I try to kind of break them up of like, okay, this is very contained. There's a very kind of sonic element here, and then kind of following with a more, I don't want to say dry line, but a line that feels more like the complete opposite, just to kind of have that balance. I think of it as like waves of like assonance and then this more kind of, I don't want to say clinical line, but like more of in a way of like, okay, this is more kind of literal, and then moving back into the more kind of melody, the more lyric.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you can balance out the more severe or harsher lines that just tell the fact with the melody. And that's why when we think about composition in music, you need to have a melody line and a harmony line. It's all about the balance. Um, and I always like to ask this question, but when you start with writing a poem, does it typically start with an image, a sound, a specific line that comes to mind, or something else?
Yeah, I love this question because I think for me, it's like I go line by line. Like I will write a single line and I'll think, okay, what comes before it and what comes after it. And I don't necessarily start with the image, but more I'm thinking like about the language, like on a literal sense. Um, I'm thinking about like the poem we were talking about, "The Bolt Teaches Me Dawn," and from what I remember, like, one of the first lines I wrote was, like, the line you just mentioned actually of, like, "Then I landed not in heaven, but in Reading," and I thought, "Okay, what comes before that?" And I was like, "Oh, like, the start of how I got there, there was no will." Will meaning kind of, like, agency and, like, wanting to make action, but also will as in, like, writing a will at the same time. And then kind of figure out, okay, what happens after that? Oh, I'm in Reading, Pennsylvania. Like, like, okay, we're moving past that. We're like in the hospital. Like, what happens there? But most of my poems just really just start with like a single line that I try to construct, and then just figuring out, okay, how did I get here, and where am I going?
That's so awesome. Thank you for unpacking that beginning line for me too, because I was only thinking about the singular meaning about no will or drive, will to live, will
Mhm.
to keep going, but I didn't realize that saying that there's no will, there's no plan for what happens after death means that maybe there is a reason to keep going because there is no plan. So the plan has to be to continue and like the dawn to keep rising. And in this poem, I understand that it works with the bull is kind of like a metaphor that ties throughout your manuscript. But how do you see the bull playing a role in this poem specifically when you don't explicitly mention the bull's presence outside of the title itself?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Sophia. Like, I think when I think of my manuscript, this was one of the first poems that I wrote. And to be honest, I was like, I don't know what the bull is, but the bull is there. And as I went through like revisions and editing, I thought the bull was kind of the man that I'm kind of talking about, because I think I mentioned earlier of like the bull being this like totemic force that's like shape shifting. It's a person. It's my therapist at the time. It's, you know, some kind of word or sentence that someone said to me that I felt very connected to. Um, and for me, the bull is just like the essence of that whole experience. But it's more of like I didn't realize it was that until I was in the future and kind of looking back. And I think of the bull, you know, as the line of like rising, 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 and them kind of being jolted into the air, like wanting, you know, I don't know if you've seen like bull rides and just how, you know, erratic the movement is, but like that rising, rising, rising. And I'm imagining myself like on the bull and being kind of like trying to hold on. Um, so like that's kind of where I was thinking when I wrote that. Just like the bull being that whole experience of like being in the hospital.
Yeah, and this wild experience of just trying to hold on no matter what. I feel like I've had that experience when doing a mechanical bull ride. It's kind of, it's kind of crazy and surreal, and you just want to. You could be really competitive and try to hold on as long as you want, but ultimately you might end up on the floor of like of the mattress on the floor. But I have seen those really wild rodeo bull riding where you have super skilled people riding on top of them, and you're just amazed by how skilled they are at staying on top of the bull. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's really cool.
It's really crazy when you watch like I've never like seen like I've never been in like the stadium to watch like a bull ride, but like seeing clips, I'm like, first of all, I'm like, why are you doing this? I'm like what is going on? But also being like, oh my gosh, like there's so much athleticism that's like necessary to like do that. And I think it's like you only need like 8 seconds to like win or get like a high score.
Mhm.
Like it's and I feel like those 8 seconds probably feel like forever when you're like doing that.
Yeah, time just slows down.
Mm.
Uh, since we're talking about your manuscript, uh, I want I want to open it up a little bit more and ask you about. Could you tell us more about the collection and the space that inhabits in your life? How did you start writing it, and how long did it take? What was your process like?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Like I was like studying, I was like in my master's of fine arts program at Rutgers University Newark, and you know we have like a thesis that like you know this is kind of the accumulation of like what your time has been there, you know. And my first year, it's a 2-year program. So my first year I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, like I'm just writing poems. And then I did a residency in August of 2024, I think it was. At Vermont Studio Center, and that was I had like my own studio there, like my own room, and I was like putting my poems on the wall. And I the idea kind of blossomed there. But before I got there, I like wrote this one poem. I didn't read it today, but um it was the kind of genesis of this idea of before the bull dreams me. And I was like I wrote that line and I'm like, what does that mean? You know, like a lot of my poetry, I start off with like a line. I'm like, what? I don't know what this means, but I'm gonna just take time with it. I'm gonna figure it out. And the manuscript really is about a lot of themes of like betrayal, how we betray ourselves, how we betray others, how our institutions betray us. I was looking at kind of famous betrayals in history, and also kind of, you know, anchoring it in a personal betrayal that I had endured with someone who I thought was my friend. I won't get into it, but I was looking at this idea of like, you know, there's Dante's Inferno and like the circles of hell. And there's a circle that's called like Ptolemea, which is Judas and Jesus, and there's like other ones there. And I kind of fixated on that idea of like, okay, maybe I was being dramatic, but I'm like, this person in my life, like that was like the ninth circle of hell for me, like dealing with that betrayal. um, and I was just thinking about, okay, like, that's a very uncomfortable emotion to have. And for me, like, it really kind of fractured my trust in people. And I spent a lot of time trying to kind of overcome that and heal from that. And the manuscript, I look at famous betrayals in history. I look at like Fred Hampton and William O'Neill in the Black Panther Party, and how um, William O'Neill was, you know, um, basically like given an ultimatum from the FBI of like, you need to infiltrate the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party and gives information on Fred Hampton, who was the leader of the Black Panther Party at that time. And I was, prior to writing this manuscript, I always saw like William O'Neill as like, oh my God, he's a traitor. Like, how could he do that? And then doing more research, I realized like he was given this impossible ultimatum of like, you need to either infiltrate this group or we're going to send you to jail. And at the end of the day, he's trying to save his life. And I was also looking at the ways that we betray ourselves. There's a film called Black Swan, and there's a character called Nia Sayers who is basically a ballerina, and she wants like the starring role in this dance, in this performance, and she kind of literally like destroys herself because she wants to be the one chosen. And looking at that as like a self betrayal, I was looking at also Billie Holiday, and just the men that surrounded her in that time, and how she was kind of she dealt with like a lot of hurt and backstabbing. And I was just interested in just looking at all these different betrayals and seeing just where my experience had aligned, but also like looking at it as like, how do you move past that? Like, how do you deal with that? And to be honest, like in my writing, I never really found an answer. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but it was just really interesting to me because I thought like, okay, like I'm not alone in this. Like this has been like a tale that's happened for like centuries, but it just happened to kind of come into my life. And for me, like the bull represents, I was thinking again of like Dante's Inferno, like the bull's kind of like a mirror of like Virgil, and like the speaker of these poems is like Dante the poet. And just kind of looking at that too, and how like betrayal kind of like really kind of alters your reality. You think I'm living this life, but then I find out that I'm really like my understanding of this situation was completely different than what was actually going on.
Wow. There's this whole legacy of literary references you're playing with here, and I think that's so astounding, especially conjuring up the bull as Virgil and you as a poet. Um, sorry, is my audio cutting out in a
A
weird way?
little bit, but I still understand.
Okay, I think it fixed itself now. Has it?
Just
Yes?
keep
No?
keep
Okay,
talking.
I'm gonna keep going. Sorry about
Okay.
that. Yeah, basically, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm so sorry. I hear it too. It's like kind of like a zippy
Yeah.
sound. Let me try. I'll just mute myself really quickly. But let me ask you the question first, which was about um when you think about I just recently took this writing workshop which said every good poem has a question, but every good poet asks all the questions. And I think that was from Joan Hirschfield or someone. But basically, I think it's okay that you didn't come up with any answers in your poems, but did you come up with any more questions about betrayal when you were writing the manuscript? And I'm gonna mute quickly and grab my AirPods.
Yeah, I think, like, doing more research and just in the writing practice, um, I think the questions of, like, for me, like, you believe that there is like safety and similarity. You think, oh, this person has experienced similar things that I have experienced, right? So like there's this common understanding, there's this common like feeling of like trust that's kind of built because like, oh, we've gone through similar things. You know how I feel, I know how you feel. There's this kind of bonding. And a lot of my manuscript was kind of questioning of like, oh, like just because there is similarity doesn't mean that this person is safe for you, or doesn't mean this person has like alternative like motives, or even just like, insecurities that kind of pour out into you. A lot of the poems, like, it's this idea of like I'm arriving at what I think is an answer, but I'm not like but I'm not there. Um and, like, the 2 poems that I read, which are from the manuscript, The Boulder is part of the manuscript, but I'm not really sure yet. I haven't really decided. Um, but it's this idea of, like, being, like, consumed by this, like, event that happens in your life, like, this betrayal. And it's my main question is, like, how do I move past this? Like, how do I not let this affect the other, um, kind of areas of my life? And I don't know, I think a lot of my poems kind of ask the question of like, okay, like I feel this thing, but what now? Like, what do I do with it? And I think a lot of poems also kind of ask that, or even just poems kind of just, being like in a point of time. And I mean, I think poetry is kind of above time. Like, it's before, it's after, it's above, below. It's not narrative really, it's not always narrative based like fiction, right? In my opinion, like I think like there's, you read a poem and you're kind of suspended for a moment. There might be like a linear action event that's happening, but it doesn't always kind of like exist like that. I think a lot of my poems kind of exist above time. And this idea of like looking at this thing and thinking like, okay, now what? Like, what do I do with this? Like,
That's so true. I was also thinking of your poem Post Sentiment. It exists in the space where you're looking backwards, hindsight, literally in the rearview mirror, but then you also ground the reader with such immediate senses. Can we do a little experiment? Can you try muting while I'm talking?
yeah,
Maybe
oh my
that's
God,
the problem.
definitely.
Let's see if that fixes it. Um, I'll keep going. So that in that way, your poems exist outside of time. I was also thinking when you're tracing the lineage of betrayal throughout history, I feel like that's both really comforting because it's like, okay, other people have gone through this before. I'm not alone. But at the same time, I would feel scared by it because like wow, like it's kind of a doomed cycle. It's impossible to break free from this continuous pattern. And a lot of your manuscript revolves around myth telling, myth retelling, deconstructing the myth. So I'm just curious, do you think that myth telling functions more as a warning against repetition or as a way of making repetition feel inevitable because these stories have happened before and will inevitably happen again?
So you're asking, is this like against myth telling, or like, can you just repeat that, like that part again?
Yeah, like do you think that myth telling is more valuable despite the harm that it causes or like that it perpetuates? Like because it tells the story and then it kind of incentivizes people to like not incentivizes, but it kind of affirms that people will do it no matter what. But is it more dangerous to tell the story so that people know that it's going to happen or is it more dangerous to not tell the story and let people do what they want with their lives?
I think it's more dangerous to not tell the story. I think that like, you know, I I I remember reading this article about how like gossip is like really important, like it's good to know what's like going on. And I feel like sharing the like events, to sharing what happens is like kind of important because I don't know, I feel like when I look at my life, I'm like there are fears that I didn't even know I needed to have that I end up kind of discovering. And I think what really was kind of so troubling about the experience that I was writing about in my manuscript was like I didn't even think that was possible. Like I am like, oh my God. Like, and again, I won't get into it because you'll have to read it when the book comes out, whenever that happens. But I think, I was also looking at again like Judas and Jesus. Um, I was looking at like even betrayals that happened within the Black Panther Party of, how they kinda treated women. I was also kind of thinking about, like, a more visual aspect. There's this artist, like, Hilma, Clement, I think I'm pronouncing her name right, and thinking about, like, the black and the white and just the contrast of these, like, kind of colors. But I think, like, the myth of, like, okay, being betrayed, like, I think it's good to tell these stories, partially because, like, when I was doing my research, I was just like, "Oh my god, like, I'm not alone in this," like, I thought I was going crazy, but I was like, "Oh," like, unfortunately, like, this is a centuries-old tale, um, but the thing too is, like, all these stories about the betrayal, no one talks about the after, and, like, how does one actually, like, deal with that, and how I think it really kind of, again, alters your reality, the way you view yourself, the way you view the world, the way you view others, the way you view your past. And I think I was really looking for that when I was doing my research, when I was writing this. And I didn't really find much of it. I see a lot of the event, but not really the after. I mean, we know, like, in the Christian Bible, like, Jesus was crucified, but, like, that was really all that I found, like, in looking at the Black Panther Party, William O'Neill, Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton died, like, he was murdered, but, like, what does it mean to live through that and to continue on? Like, that was the big question that I was trying to figure out, and I felt like I was trying to write through that.
What happens when the betrayal and the betrayer and the betrayed still live on afterward? That's such a cool question. Um, Speaking of transcending time, we have a question from the audience that wants to go back to your origins of poetry. The question is, when did you first start writing poetry?
Oh my god, it's actually really funny. Maybe it's not funny, but just for me, I think it's funny because I started off as, like, a fiction writer. I actually before that, I wrote scripts, like, when I was younger. This is gonna go against everything that I believe, but I hated reading. Like, I hated reading. I loved watching movies when I was younger. And I was like, "I wanna make a movie," so I wrote, like, screenplays, and I was, like, super young. Like, I figured out what a screenwriter was, and I was like, "I'm gonna write that," and I wrote, like, scripts and notebooks and had my friends perform them for me. And then as I got a bit older, like, probably around high school, I started writing, like, fiction, like, narrative, like, like the book. And then I was, like, writing that, I was writing these kind of short stories. I wrote, like, a mini novel, and then it was, in my I think it was my junior year of high school, um, and I discovered slam poetry, and I was like, "This is incredible, oh my gosh," like, I was watching, like, there's this channel called, like, Button Poetry, and I was, like, watching these videos, I was reading these authors, and I was just like, "This is incredible," and that's really when I started writing poetry. I wrote one of my first poems, I performed it at, like, an open mic, and I was just like I was changed after that, and then I ended up going to, like, a summer writers workshop at my undergrad before it was my undergrad, and had, like, my first poetry workshop and, like, did that, and I was just like, "I love poetry, like, I wanna study writing." And it kind of just branched off from that.
It's really beautiful that you got to do the writing program
Mm.
at your college before you entered it. I think that's a beautiful full circle moment. And we have another question from the audience, which I really like. How has living in different places influenced your writing?
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, I think the work that I was writing in, like, my hometown was very grounded in, like, the experiences that I had because it was, like, first. And then I moved to Pennsylvania for undergraduate school, and I was, like, trying to write about, like, Appalachia, like, that kind of, like, environment, and just also kinda just, like, writing through my experience of, like, being in college. I lived in France for, like, about 6 months, and then I was writing about just being in this foreign city. It was in Aix-en-Provence, and, um, like, living there and, like, having this whole new world. It's my first time leaving the country of America, and I just was like, "This is incredible." I was just like, "Wow," like, I had like a complete altered perspective on like my life, myself, and like the world around me, and being able to just be immersed in a different culture was super impactful for me. And just like the people that I met and speaking the language, not very well, but trying my hardest to do that. Coming back to the US, like moving to the state of New Jersey, all these things have influenced my writing. They kind of are like stickered to my being. Um, and while I was in France, I also traveled to London, I traveled to, like, Ireland, like, I was in these different places, and they all kind of just, like, widened my perspective, not of just the world, but, like, what my writing can do and, like, what I can write about, so it's a bit of everything.
Amazing. I've been to Aix-en-Provence before, and it's so beautiful. And I think it's a really cool tradition of impressionist painting that's occurred there, which kind of neatly transitions me over into my next question about art and its influence on your writing. You have this really great poem that you read from The Gate, which you mentioned was an ekphrastic poem after Haste by Danielle McKinney. And I was wondering, what is your relationship between visual art and poetry? How do you use it to inspire or shape your writing?
Oh, I love this question. I went to an arts high school, and I studied visual art there actually. I studied more specifically like photography and sculpture. So I feel like I've always kind of had this eye for like imagery and like design. And I'm a lover of arts. I love going to Chelsea to like, gallery hopping by myself. I was just at an opening like a few days ago. I try to go and immerse myself as much as I can. Um, and I don't know, I think, like, I'm thinking about the manuscript of, like, me watching the film Black Swan and how that influenced and thinking about Hilma, Clement's work. I think it all just influences me. I think it's important, like, as a writer to, like, just exist in other spaces and to, basically, like, immerse yourself with other arts. I think they're all connected. I think that's really important because I think it only, heightens and influences your writing. um, there's this, stereotype of like the writer in the attic and they're, recluse, they don't do anything. But I'm like, I think in order for your writing to really resonate and um with people, like you have to live in your life, like you have to live in the world. And I think art, visual art, film, music is so important. I think listening to music, I'm a big, like, I have my favorite artist, like that influences me. Sometimes I listen to music while I write, not always. Um, but like when I'm writing like particular projects or, sometimes when I'm working on like a novel right now, like I have like several playlists that I think really encompass like the mood that I'm trying to write through the world. Um, but yeah, I think it's just important, I think all these aspects influence me. Just trying to be kind of like a world citizen and kind of branch out and, you know, just experience other arts that is not just writing.
Beautiful. It's interesting that you studied sculpture in visual art when you were in high school because I wanted to say that I felt that the gate was almost structural or sculptural and it's the way that it falls on the page. So that was really cool. And since you also dabbled in screenwriting and you still do fiction writing alongside your poetry, how does each genre inform the other genre of your writing?
Oof, that's kind of hard. I feel like for me, like going from like screenwriting to fiction to poetry, it's still doing fiction. Like I find that I can write more like honest, more like intimate feelings in fiction than I can do in poetry, which is like kind of, I think for me, like really interesting. Like the manuscript I'm working on now, like I'm really able, I touch on it in my poems, but I really feel like I'm able to like submerge myself in the feeling in the time through fiction just because it's narrative driven and you have more time. Like again, poems can be very short. Like I love a one-page poem. Like I love when my poem fits on one page. That's like for me, I'm like that's the goal. Doesn't always happen, but like, one pager I'm very keen on writing. Um and I think just like yeah, like I'm thinking more about kind of I don't know, Like, I'm thinking more kind of like, okay, how can I like translate, adapt certain themes like through the different mediums? That's like really what I'm thinking about. And like every medium just allows you to kind of evict a new feeling, evict a new narrative than the one prior.
Yeah. I love it when writers and artists experiment in other genres and other mediums too, because I feel like it just makes you more well-rounded as an artist in general. I kind of have the opposite instinct when it comes to poetry being more personal than fiction, but I'm glad that multiple perspectives exist. To me, it's just that the shortness and brevity of a poem distills it into its most essential parts, which is where like the emotional gut punch happens. But it's like that's what it could be for me, and it could be completely different for you, Kailah, or and completely different, but in an entirely different way for another person listening. So I think that's the plurality of poetry, the plurality of writing is what is the most important part here, not like the individual experience. And then we have another great question from the audience, which is, does reading your own poems out loud, speaking of like when you did your slam poetry era and your open mic, for first open mic, does it change the way that you think about poetry?
It honestly does. I try not to read my poems out loud until like I have like a full draft. So, when I'm still kind of sculpting it, when I have like one line or two lines, I try not to read it out loud because I think for me, like it changes my relationship to the work. Um, there's certain words that I emphasize. There's, the overall kind of the speed to which I speak the poems that I read them. And I think reading them out loud, I kind of it feels like I'm like there's this embodiment of the piece. Like I'm like, oh, I am this piece right now. Like I'm speaking it, like it's coming from my mouth, from my body. Whereas writing on the paper kind of feels far away. And I'm like, I'm reading this piece. I'm like, oh, like this is really settled like in my core right now. And I'm like, what am I trying to relay through these words? It feels more personal, more vulnerable when read them out loud when I speak them versus just kind of reading them on a page. I don't think this is necessarily like a bad thing or a good thing. I think it's just like a way that like something that just happens. And I don't know, I'm really interested in just, hear like, the sonic element of reading it out loud, and what you can do like with your voice, versus just reading it on the page. And I've heard people read my work before and like, oh, that's so interesting how they read it that way. Like, I don't think I would have thought that. And just, um, hearing it out loud just I think just it just changes your relationship with the poem. I think so.
Yeah, and you previously mentioned listening to songs or having like different playlists that you put on for your writing. I was wondering, do you have any writing routines or rituals that help you return to writing, especially if you're feeling like a little bit disconnected?
Yeah, it's actually interesting because I've felt very disconnected from my poetry these like in currently these last few months. And for me it's just to read other people's works, like genuinely, like I like to read people's works. Um, like I will just read a poem and like just I start off with the word. I like find a word, I'm like, that's an interesting word. Let me start a poem from that and like picking one word and like putting it on a line and like kind of building outside, like building branching from that and like, okay, what comes before that? What comes after that? Like that's kind of where like my practice can be like can start sometimes. Um I think sometimes I think like, okay, I've written about this topic several times. I think it's time to kind of discover something new, and reading other people's works really help that. I'm like, oh, I can just read, like, let me read this. This is very different from me, but this is kind of tackling an emotion, an event that I haven't written about. And I think, okay, how does this relate to my life? How can I write something from that? Because my poetry is very kind of personal.
Do you have any poets or authors that you've been reading or listening to lately that you can recommend?
Yeah, so music, I love Alice Coltrane. I love Ethel Cain. I'm thinking what else? Like book-wise, there's like Tina Chang I like. There's Camille T. Dungy, that I read her book recently, America Love Story just came out. Um, there's also like Sam Sachs, he has a collection that I really enjoy. And Carson too. I'm trying to think, like there's Taylor Johnson, her collection Inheritance. Um, I'm like my stacks of books. I don't know if you can see. They're like right next to me. I'm like I should look over there. Layla Shati, I've been liking a lot too. It really just depends. Like I just try to read a lot. Like I like to read like widely. And if I read a book, I'm like this isn't my thing. I'm like let me continue. Let me just see what this is about. Not just shutting it down when it doesn't relate to my like poetics, whatever that means.
You like to stick with it. You like to stay with the bull, even if
Yeah.
it's fucking you off. Yeah,
Right.
it's really awesome. I'm writing down some of your recs, by the way. Thank you. I also was thinking, when you're a teacher and you're teaching undergraduate students, did working with other students ever influence your own work or give you inspiration?
Oh my god, I definitely did. Like teaching kind of made me look more deeply into the work that I was assigned to teach and thinking like, oh, like what does it mean to like this is a thing that I read, that I experienced, right? That like, oh, I want to share with someone. Like, I'm like, okay, what is it about this that like I think needs to be heard, seen, experienced? And kind of teaching really was like just hearing people's like different perspectives and their different kind of how they devoured a piece and how they kind of look at it, which maybe and often was different than I did. um and teaching introduction to creative writing at Rutgers, these for a lot of these students, this was their first time really interacting with like creative writing. Like they were used to writing like academic essays, college essays, book reports, and it's like, no, like we're gonna read a lyric essay, we're gonna read this really funky poem, we're gonna read a short story, and then really kind of realizing like, oh, like I didn't realize this was like a thing that can happen. So it was really exciting to kind of introduce these students into like a new, I guess, like factor of like writing, like a new way to write. And it made me just also just appreciate like the power of like creative writing and like the power of poetry. And just, I would do these when I was best in particular teaching like the poetry unit. I would have these like poem packets of like, it'll be like 10, 20 poems for them to read. And I would say, just read them, find your favorite, and be ready to talk about them. Like that's kind of what it was. It was interesting to kind of hear the different pieces that stood out to the students.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of being in like a non-creative writing class was when a teacher would bring a poem to kind of like ground the class. It was really special. So I'm glad that you were able to provide that for other students. Uh, I can't believe that our time together is almost up. There are so many more questions that I wanted to ask you about themes and the idea of like opening up a piece, especially with like the optometrist office and post sentiment and like your line, some warmth is irrational and two inlets in winter. So I feel like there's just so much more to unpack. People need to keep an eye out for your manuscript so that they can read more of your work. I just want to close out our session with the question, if you have any advice for new or aspiring poets and writers, what advice would it be?
Advice for new poets and writers. Oh my gosh. I don't even know if I'm like I don't know if I'm the right person to give advice. But I think about like my introduction to poetry, and like for me it was like a way to become closer to myself, to accept my feelings, using poetry as a vessel to like communicate like the harder parts of life and to voice things that I was scared of. But also like writing it, seeing in front of you, it was a way to kind of articulate how I was feeling, what I was experiencing, and kind of bring a bit of clarity. And also just curiosity too. Like a lot of the poems that I've written in my life, again, I think I mentioned this earlier of like I have questions that don't have answers, but like that's okay. You know, It's really about just holding space with yourself, allowing yourself to exist, allowing yourself to kind of feel things and seeing, okay, like where do I go from here? I don't know, but there's excitement in that. And a lot of the poems, I think a lot of poetry is to discover, to, experience, to see, like, okay, what's going on in the world around me, and how do I funnel that idea into a poem? How do I funnel that experience into onto a piece of paper, onto a document? A lot of those things. So, I mean, people say write what you know, but also don't write what you know. Try to experience something else. Try to, slip on another kind of. I think about persona poems. Slip on a new glove, slip on your past self, slip on your future self, like there's so much to discover, and there's so much to just experience in poetry, in your writing. And it can be a way to just kind of, again, exist above time, exist below it. um I just find it, for me, like, I don't want to say therapeutic, but it just feels like it's hard work, but it can be really good and fulfilling work.
Beautiful. Yeah, be curious, keep questioning, and through your poetry, you can find space for yourself outside of the constraints of time. It's amazing. Thank you so much, Kailah. Thank
Yeah,
you for your time.
Sophia.
Bye, guys.